All right. So looking at the image here, the Great Wall, what's it also known as? Remember that from a week ago or so? It's also known as the, what, Mr. Walls? Long Wall. Sometimes it's also known as the Wall of 10,000 Li. I'm going to write that out to the side to start off with. Names for the Great Wall. The Long Wall, or Wall of 10,000 Li. Li, L-I, is a form of measurement. It's kind of like a mile or kilometer. It's about 3/4 of a mile. So 3 laps around the track rather than 4 laps around the track. 10,000 Li, okay? Is the wall one long continuous wall? No, it's not. All right. Built up in many different sections. Why is it built in different sections? Anybody explain that? Why isn't one long connected wall? What is that, Sierra?
To send signals.
Say it again. To send signals. Okay, so at certain times, whenever they wanted to communicate along the wall, they would by fire, right? But why is it one long continuous wall? Why is there disconnect? Why is there separation of wall? Yes, Ms. Nerdia? Okay, the dynasties were different and they changed area that they controlled, right? They expanded. The empire grew. And once it grew, then they had to build another wall farther out, right? To protect the newly conquered land of China there, right? What's the mythological creature that's related to the idea of the wall, Sierra? The dragon, okay? So you can look at it and it kind of looks like the back of a dragon, right, as it goes across the countryside there. But I want you to think about the symbolism associated with the dragon. You think about mythology, what does a dragon do? What's the fire? Well, it breathes fire, okay? That's like its tool.
It's destructive.
It's its weapon. It's destructive.
Like, take down.
Flies. What's its purpose though? When you see a dragon in these stories of mythology, or even in like Disney things, they're usually doing something. They're defending a particular territory or a castle, or gold, or a queen or princess, something like that, right? So if we think about that symbolism and connectedness between the wall and the dragon, what's the wall doing? The wall, like a dragon, is trying to protect the Chinese culture, right? To preserve the Chinese culture, to make sure that it is not, being influenced, undermined by outside cultures. Sound good? The Chinese are ethnocentric just like everybody else, just like all the other cultures there, okay? There used to be these Chinese map makers, and they would draw China in the middle of their map, and they would make it excessively large, right? Make it really, really big. And then everybody outside of China, and they make it much, much smaller and inferior in comparison, right? The idea with those map makers was this closer that you got to China, the more civilized you were. The farther away from China you were, the more barbaric you were, right? So it's kind of like the Roman Empire as well. If you're a part of the Roman Empire, you're civilized. If you're not, you're uncivilized, okay? So that concept is applicable to China as well, okay? All right, the first dynasty. We're going to go through a few of these, about 7 or 8 of them, okay? Now again, based upon sources, there may be a few more, but we picked out the majority of them. The first dynasty is the Shang dynasty, okay? Try to give you some imagery to think about concerning accomplishments, okay? I want you to think about that variable of time and specialization of skills from that, going from a hunting and gathering society to becoming more and more advanced, okay? So what did they have? They had writing, right? If you're constantly searching for the herd and your next source of food, do you have time to sit down and come up with a written language? No, you don't. Okay, so it exemplifies how advanced the Shang family had become. Now, are they really a dynasty at this point in time? Not exactly in the sense of some of the later dynasties. Fairly small and weak in comparison. You could see the size of the Shang dynasty here on the map. They also developed a calendar, right? So that's pretty significant that they could calculate the changing of the seasons, right? They would do that because most of their life is based off of what? The production of what? Most of their life revolves around what task? Yeah?
Getting plenty of food and stuff like
And where do they get their food?
that. Domestication.
Domestication of plants and animals, mostly plants here, so it's agriculture, right? It's growing crops, and so developing a calendar would enable them to be more successful in that endeavor there, okay? And then this, of course, is from what movie? Mulan, and he's representing, the ancestral god. So that idea of ancestral spirits, ancestral worship, originates with the Shang dynasty. Okay, so again, in comparison to the later dynasties, fairly weak, but it's a start. A loose confederation of settlements, so it's really not an empire. They did develop an advanced system of writing, so it gives you an idea that they had specialization of skills and a larger amount of time. And that, again, is contingent upon the domestication of plants and animals. They prayed to ancestral spirits. They had a calendar, and they did transition from small settlements into larger cities. And then they created that concept of the mandate of heaven. It originated here in the Shang dynasty. Sound good? This right to rule given to them by the ancestral spirits. Again, all that originates with the Shang. Okay? This gives you an example of how advanced they were. What did they write on when they wrote? You write it on paper. They didn't write on paper because they didn't have that available to them. So they wrote on the back of tortoise shells. Can you imagine doing that?
It would be dead or alive.
It would be dead. Yeah. You try to. How do you do that?
Just check it out and just start writing.
You have to separate the tortoise. You're writing on the inside, I believe, of the tortoise shell because you could have. I believe the inside would be able to. You would have to be able to make impressions into the shell. I think that the outside of the shell you wouldn't be able to do that, but I believe the inside of the shell you would. Okay, so think about how valuable writing would be then. Anything that'd be written down. When you write stuff down on pieces of paper, a lot of times, the value of it isn't as much. If it's on the back of a tortoise shell, you work so hard to put that in place in the first place, right? It's going to be much more valuable to you, I guess. All right, the next dynasty is the Chow dynasty. I'm going to spend some time here with the Chow. So the Shang's the first, and then you get the Chow dynasty, and this is where you get the development of some philosophies / belief systems. Sometimes these philosophies that developed during the Chow dynasty are seen almost like a religion, practiced almost like a religion. Okay, so we say philosophy / belief system. Okay, so the Chow are actually a people group, a different culture away from the Shang. They weren't inside of the Shang territory. They came from the western portion of China and they migrated east towards the Shang area, and then they conquered the Shang dynasty and the Shang family. Sound good? All right, so they're really outsiders. Underneath the Chow dynasty, you can see that it lasted a long time, almost 1,000 years. In that time period, there's two key figures that you need to make sure that you're familiar with. This guy, Confucius, and this guy, Lao Tzu. Okay? Now, you guys eat Chinese food, Americanized Chinese food?
Oh, yeah.
Right? And with each of your orders, you always get this. What do they give it? You don't order it, but they give it to you.
Rice.
No.
Cookies.
The fortune cookies at the end, right? And so you
I don't eat Chinese.
yeah, so does anybody ever really eat the fortune cookie?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's surprising. Yes, I don't. Maybe I should. Anyways, you open them up, and then you've got the sayings, right? The thoughts inside of them, okay? Most of those quotes that are inside of your fortune cookies are quotes from Confucius. Some of them are not, though, right? And then sometimes when you get them, I've had people open up and look, and they see, well, it's not Confucius, it's this other guy. Who's this other guy, right? If it's the other guy, it's usually Lao Tzu or Lao Tse is the other guy. Sound good? So we have two different philosophies that developed during this dynasty, relatively same time period, and they contrast one another. They're on opposite ends of the spectrum. Okay, so Confucianism, Confucius, remember, right? Strict and rigid, very conservative. Strict, rigid, conservative. A lot of rules, a lot of guidelines by which you live your life. Okay, he was big into identifying your role, and whether that would be inside of one's family, the role of a father, the role of a mother, the role of a brother or a sister or a child. And he said if you figure out what your role is and you complete the responsibilities and tasks that are given to your particular role, then you'll be successful in life, right? He also applied that concept to just society as a whole. What is your role in the social system in which you live? You fulfill that role, and you'll have success. The key concept that everybody was pursuing was this idea that he kind of termed, it's called Junzi, Junzi. You may write that outside, Junzi. And what is Junzi? Junzi is the idea that you can become the best man possible, or the best woman possible, okay? The best you can be, okay, is Junzi. And Confucius' idea is that you follow his principles, his guidelines, his teachings, then you can achieve Junzi as well. Okay? So very conservative. Lao Tzu, or Lao Tse, came up with this other idea called Taoism. It's spelled with a T. Taoism. Everybody say Taoism. All right, so it's spelled with a T, but it's kind of pronounced with a D. Right? And Taoism, its purpose is to achieve harmony with nature. It's the basic guideline behind that particular philosophy is to achieve harmony with nature. So when I share this idea with students, a lot of times freshmen in our particular culture, they go and stereotype people that are followers or Taoists, and they say they're tree huggers, right? That's not exactly what's going on, okay? There's this concept called the Wu Wei. Everybody say Wu Wei.
Wu Wei.
All right? Wu Wei, under the Taoist principles, it means to go with the flow, right? Lao Tzu would say that sometimes we try to do too much in our lives. We try to take control over everything. And what we need to do is we need to just sit back and go with the flow, right? You guys ever been whitewater rafting, canoeing before?
Yeah.
All right, they tell you a rule. They say if you fall out of the canoe, you fall out of the boat, what are you supposed to do? What are you not supposed to do, actually?
Put your feet down.
Well, drown is the ultimate, what you try not to do. But what is it? You don't put your feet down, right? A lot of times the water that you're in, the depth of it, it's not that deep. You may be 2-3 feet, right? And so you naturally want to just stand up. But the flow of the river sometimes is pretty fast, right? Pretty strong, the current. And if you put your feet down, and you get your feet stuck in the rocks, the current can sometimes push you over, and then your feet are stuck and you can't get back up. And so what happens? You drown because you tried to do too much, right? So the idea is that you need to get your feet up and just go with the flow. So you take that principle, that idea of going with the flow, and you apply it to your daily life and your daily activities. Sometimes we stress, right, about too much. We work way too hard when really we just need to sit back, relax, go with the flow there. Sound good? So Confucianism is all about control, right? And following these restrictions and guidelines. Taoism is about going with the flow and relaxing there. Yep?
Okay, what was the last term that you just said?
Wu Wei. W-U, that's Wu, and then Wei, W-E-I. Wu Wei. Go with the flow. Sound good? So you think about the Chao dynasty, the second dynasty after the Shang. You think about philosophies. You think about Confucius, and you think about Lao Tzu, okay, and Taoism. And again, there's not like a God to worship in these philosophies. It's not like you're worshiping Confucius, right? He's not seen as a godlike figure so much as a philosopher, okay? Same thing with Lao Tzu. I guess one more thing before we move on. There is a similar concept with like Amerindian cultures, similar to Taoism, similar principles. It's called animism. You guys ever heard of animism before? Animism is the idea that you can find spiritual forces in nature and like living things, right? Like we'll watch a movie when we get back from Christmas about this young guy who gets lost in the barrens, the wilderness in Canada, and he tracks down a deer, right? And so they talk about this spiritual force in the deer, animism. Okay, that's Amerindians. Taoism finds like spiritual forces in nature. It doesn't necessarily have to be alive, so it could be mountains, trees, rocks, those type of things. Sound good? All right, the next dynasty is Qin dynasty. You guys know what these are?
Soldiers.
They're soldiers. There's kind of statues of soldiers. You might know what they're called, commonly known as. Miss Hannah? The terracotta warriors, right? All right. These guys were made by an emperor named Qin Shi Huangdi. Everybody say Qin Shi Huangdi. All right. He had all these artisans create these guys, and if you look close, there's not a single one that's alike. And there's thousands of them, right? They have either different facial expressions, different stances, different armor. They're not a single one. So it's not like mass-produced like you would think and anticipate there. So think about how much time they have to have in order to be able to do that.
How long would you think it would take to make one of those?
Yeah, imagine it'd take quite a while. Okay. The other thing is, imagine how much, money, power they must have had, or he must have had, in order for this to be put into place. Right. So the Qin dynasty is fairly short, and it's kind of highlighted by the emperor Qin Shi Huangdi. Okay. Very powerful leader. He actually transitioned China from a feudalistic type of state. So really, they're not much of an empire prior to this. It's mostly land-based, sectioned off feudal lords, delegating power down through society. But he's going to unify everything, and he's going to make himself the emperor, the most powerful person in all of the land, right? So transitioned China from feudalism to imperialism. The Great Wall, it's built in many different dynasties, but the one that I want you to remember the Great Wall to be associated with is the Qin dynasty. Sound good? So they put a lot of effort into building the Great Wall there. We're going to take a moment here, and we're going to watch this, I think it's 4 or 5 minutes, TED video on Qin Shi Huangdi. Okay? You may want to write down a few notes as we go through, okay?
What happens after death? Is there a restful paradise? An eternal torment? A rebirth?
We got just a few more moments left. Let's see if we can get a couple more of these dynasties in. So the big three are really the first three. Right? There's a lot of information with the Shang, the Chao, and the Qin. Sound good? Those are the big ones that a lot of our content and our test questions come from. There's a few from the rest of the dynasties that we go through. Okay, starting with the Han Dynasty. The Han Dynasty, really like all of the dynasties, if you really think about all the dynastics, you think about the dynastic cycle. At the end of the dynastic cycle, there's going to be opposition because of all the bad things that are happening, right? Whether that would be corruption or famine or war. So there's opposition to the ruling family. So it was created in opposition to the Qin family. They conquered the Silk Road at this point in time, and they controlled this Silk Road. Does anybody know what this Silk Road is? It's exemplified by this map down here. Yes, Miss Sierra?
Trading.
It's a trade route, right? Connecting two large empires, right? The Chinese Empire over here, and then who's over here? The Roman Empire, Sound good? So, call it the Silk Road. Mostly it's probably from the perspective of the Romans wanting the silk that originated in China, but it's more than just silk passing along this road, okay? Now the thing is, you control the road, and then you can tax people, make money off of it as well, okay? But the one key point that I want you to think about with having the Silk Road here up on a part of our notes, you either need to write acculturation or cultural diffusion out to the side of it, okay? So this exemplifies that China is not isolated, and they're not cutting themselves off from the rest of the world. If they're making connections with Rome, right, and other cultures on the way in between, then they're sharing cultural ideas with others, okay? And through that process, you usually see a lot of advancement and growth, and becoming more and more advanced. Acculturation or cultural diffusion. So it's probably going both ways because of the Silk Road. They're either acculturating, taking on certain characteristics from others, which you'll see here in just a moment with the belief system, or they're diffusing some of the ideas that originated in China out to other places around the world, right? Or at least along this road. They developed paper at this point in time, so no more turtle shells, evidently, and a seismograph. What does a seismograph do? It measures earthquakes, right? Why would they have a need for something like that? Well, it's fairly common in Southeast Asia. If you look at the big map over here, there's a big ring that surrounds the Pacific Ocean here, called the Ring of Fire, because of the plate tectonics pushing up against one another, pulling away from each other. Especially in Southeast Asia, earthquakes are fairly common. Okay, so they developed a tool to measure the size of these earthquakes. Okay. They also had Buddhism being brought in to the Chinese culture at this point in time. So this would be acculturation. Buddhism did not originate in China, but it's something that comes from India, the Indian culture. Right. So Buddhism is a little bit more towards a religion, much more so than what you would have with like Confucianism and Taoism. Okay, let's do one more before we finish up, and then we'll finish the remaining one or two tomorrow. The Sui dynasty. Buddhism grew during this particular dynasty. You can see that we're getting closer and closer. To modern, well, not really. 581 to 618 AD. The introduction of civil service exams. You may want to put an asterisk next to this. I think a lot of what goes on in China today with their educational system and the connectedness, things that happened in the past. Right? These civil service exams were ideas that you'd have to take these tests, and based upon your scores on these tests, it determined what position you could acquire, whether that would be in politics or other aspects of society. If you think about the educational system in China today, extremely competitive, right? In order for you to get the good jobs, it starts in educational programs at an early age, right? Starting off at a young age. If you do well, then you get to go to the good school. The good school, again, you climb up that ladder, you get the good jobs eventually. You don't do well so well in school, you don't do well on their tests, then you don't get as good a job, you don't get as much money, your life is a little bit more challenging. I think a lot of that goes back to its history of the civil service exams back in the Sui dynasty. Did not last very long, had some military campaigns, became very expensive, a lot of tax burdens and debt, and that turned the cycle over pretty quickly there. Okay? Let's finish 3 questions.